There are two primary issues that I want to talk to you today about. One is this reporting that on the 11-week-old baby boy that passed away in 2018, and the case that has been brought before the coroner, and the circumstances surrounding that, and the inadequacies of the department to be able to deal with that particular problem. Now, I'm going to be discussing a whole host of stuff today, so I'd like you to stick with me and hang on, because there's a whole host of issues in relation to the department itself just not functioning as any reasonable department should. And I'm going to be discussing what that is, and I'm going to be looking at some solutions in my view, in order to fix that, so that perhaps the department can start to operate a little differently. Not that necessarily they would ever listen to me. I mean, after all, who am I? I'm a lowly social worker who runs a child protection party and advocates for parents whose kids have been removed. And I've been doing that for a long time, wanting this system to change so that parents get a fair deal. But we must be wary of the fact that there are some parents out there who are just not being appropriate parents, and that in this particular case, which I've been discussing for the last couple of days, this is about a baby boy, 11-month-old, who should not have died because the department should have taken action in order to deal with the circumstances surrounding the living conditions of this child. In effect, the child department abdicated their responsibility about working with this family. They chose not to work with this family because it was either too hard, or simply, as will be reported in a moment, the mother told them that she was ashamed of the condition of the house and she wouldn't let people in. I would suggest that that in itself is a reason for investigating. But the department chose not to. They chose to appoint someone independent outside the department, an NGO, to go and inquire about what was happening in the house. And clearly the person who ever did that needs to be held accountable, because they chose not to enter the home. As a result, an 11-month-old child unnecessarily passed away. It's a crime in itself, and the question really is, who becomes accountable for these types of errors? There are two major issues with regard to the department. Number one is their inappropriate and inadequate assessment processes, which often leave families and children at risk. And the other is a risk aversion, which means they focus on everybody and in other cases remove kids unnecessarily. There's no way in the world anyone can argue that they have the balance right, because they don't. They never have. And probably the way that they're going, as I'll point out later on in the video, they never ever will, because they don't understand in essence what the issues are, and I will discuss those in just a moment. But before we get there, I want to talk about this case of this 11-week-old child who passed away in 2018. Now, I also want to say that I appreciate the work that Lauren Novak and some of her colleagues at the Advertiser have been doing in relation to this work. It's amazing. Lauren's kept the focus, particularly on the Child Protection Department. Many of the issues that have come about have been investigated by Lauren, and I congratulate her for the wonderful work that she is doing. I know that Lauren, as a mother, is particularly concerned, I think, about what happens to kids and how we in our environment, in our community, manage and deal with the issues that families have, and how they manage that, and how they can bring about better outcomes for all kids, for that matter. And I congratulate Lauren for the work that she's doing. But I'll bring you to this article, which it says, Inquest into death of 11-week-old boy. I've talked about this before, but in the Advertiser they had a video, which I can't bring up now. It seems to have gone on my computer, but in this video they show you the condition of the house, and there are pictures here, which I'll show you in a moment, which indicate the appalling conditions in which these kids were living. Opening the inquest, Counsel assisting the coroner, Sally Giles, said the primary focus of the evidence would be the family's interactions with the department before and after the child's death. Now, I don't think we've heard anything about what happened after the child's death and what those interactions were, but we stand by, waiting to hear exactly what happened and how the department responded around all of this. Ms. Giles said 23 reports have been made about the conditions in which the child's siblings were living, with many of those predating the birth of the child. So they had been aware, the department had been aware because of those notifications as to what was happening in the home, but they still chose to do nothing about it. I mean, there is no explanation, no reasonable explanation as to why the department would have chosen not to have become involved with this particular family. And as we scour through these pictures, we can see the appalling conditions. There is nobody in the community who would think that this is an appropriate environment in which to raise children. And we all should be horrified at what was happening in this household and that the department chose to do nothing. And I do wonder, who is going to take responsibility? Who's going to accept responsibility for the fact that they didn't get involved and that a child passed away? It's also worth noting that there were other children living in this house as well. And, you know, when we think, I don't know what ages they were specifically, it hasn't been identified, but there were other kids. And what sort of existence did they have having to live in such squalor? A video of the house filmed by police and played to the court showed extreme levels of squalor, including animal feces, rubbish, including dirty nappies strewn across the house, and flies and cats throughout. And I reported this yesterday. The inquest heard that Rachel Mayfield, the family's case manager for the not-for-profit, had been frequently refused access to the family's home to conduct welfare checks on the children. And now I want to know who this Rachel Mayfield was, and why isn't it that she hasn't been held responsible for what happened in this household? What were the circumstances which prevented her from entering the house? Now, I know that when the department meets resistance, that is, families refuse to allow them into the house, that they can call the police, and the police can assist them at least getting inside the house. They're legally required to do just that. They have the provisions within the Act to enter a home where they believe that children are at risk. Question is, why did they choose not to do that in this particular instance? Was it because they passed this over to an NGO, someone else outside the department, who may not have had the legal authority to have done this in the first place, to enter the home, that is, in the first place? So what was their thinking that allowed this matter to be placed with another agency to be dealt with? I have no idea, but we certainly need to find out. The house was appalling. The mother would tell Miss Mayfield that she was too ashamed of the home and would not let her into the house. Now, the fact that she was ashamed of the home, that she knew, the mother knew that this was an atrocious environment, and surely that would have been a warning to Miss Mayfield to have done something about this, even if it was re-notifying the authorities and having the police come and do a welfare check. I cannot understand why this wasn't taken further and what prohibited it. Despite the seriousness of the child living in what was later described by a detective as disgusting squalor, the referral to the department was given a 10-day window in which to be investigated. The supervisor, as the department's rural office, decided that the office had no capacity to deal with notification, and on the 23rd of November she moved to close the notification. Who is this supervisor? Why is she not held responsible for what has happened here as well? DCP did not take any action in relation to the referral within the 10-day period, hence a child died. Ms. Giles said the inquest would focus on the state of the house in which the family was living, which was described by police officers as the worst he have seen in 20 years. Rotten food on the floor. Let's look at some of these conditions of the house. This is terrible. Absolutely atrocious. It is abundantly clear the baby died living in squalor in a home which placed him at risk of physical and psychological harm, and the department have been alerted on numerous occasions of the living situation of these children. And so the inquest goes on. Miss Mager interviewed the child's mother, who said the injury had been caused by one of the baby's siblings offering him a toy and accidentally hitting him in the chin. And that has been disputed, I believe, by the police. And I don't know what action has actually been taken against the mother or any other adults that were in the home at the time, but clearly at this particular point, we do not know. But hopefully, at some point, we will find out. Now, the other issue that So that's an ongoing issue, which I hope we can investigate over time and present with you the information that we gather, which would be through the advertiser and through other media outlets. But it is a focus that we need to have, because the department needs to be held responsible for what their failings were in relation to this particular case. The other major issue is another report by Lauren Novak today, which highlights the inadequacies that sit within the department. Now, before I talk about this in detail, I do need to be honest with you, which I always am, but in this particular instance, particularly around social workers. Now, most of you know I'm an accredited mental health social worker. I've been so for 30 years, and I work a lot with the department in order to be able to advocate for parents so that their kids can be returned to them. I do have issues with some of the social workers that I work with. I have a problem with their professionalism, the way they treat clients, and the way they generally may work in order to assess issues. And I get particularly upset about their sense of risk aversion, wanting to prevent something from happening which probably wouldn't happen anyway, and how that impacts families and children. But I do want to say that there are a number of social workers I work with, and I say quite a few actually. I haven't got a percentage, whether it's 50-50, I don't really know. But there are some social workers out there who really do a fabulous job. In fact, last week I had an occasion to meet with DCP and a couple of social workers that were working with a father. And I must confess, one of those social workers who'd only been in the profession for 4 years was fabulous. A young woman, not lots of experience, but she had the skill set to be able to ask the appropriate questions, not appear to be intrusive. She was gentle, she was respectful. She did a great job. And it is a reminder to all of us that there are some fabulous social workers out there, some people who really do believe in what they're doing, who have the skill set in order to make people feel comfortable and not feel attacked. In fact, one of the recommendations that I'm going to make when I go through this segment in a moment is that we start listening to the stakeholders. My experience is that parents understand what they prefer to experience from social workers than anybody else, that they have an understanding as to what's appropriate, what should be said, the way it's said, the impact that it has on them. And this encourages them to either choose to work with the department or not to work with them. It's as simple as that. And my recommendation, my number one recommendation to the department, is to sit down and have more conversations with your client group, that is the parents and the children who are old enough to speak, to have conversations with them about what it is that they would prefer and how they would prefer to be treated by your workers. You will be surprised what people have to say. People know when they're treated with respect. They know when they're listened to and when they're heard. They know that you could be working with them, not against them. But if they feel attacked, they will build a wall that will prevent any further form of negotiation, any form of cooperation will be evaporated immediately once they feel attacked. I said to a social worker not long ago, an older social worker, that the client just didn't want you to use blaming language that made them feel responsible for things which they didn't believe that they were responsible for. And I told her that, and she acknowledged it. But within a minute, she had used the same language back to the client. You could see the client almost recoiling from what she'd said, because I just told her not to do that it's unhelpful. I didn't reprimand her, I did it gently, but she didn't hear what was being said. And I think this is a fundamental problem within the child protection system, that they don't hear what clients are saying. The most common complaint we get at CPP about the department is that they lie. So, and I don't suggest that they're lying personally. I suggest that they're distorting the parents' views. They have their views, but they refuse to report the parents' views. And so as a result of those disconnects, people believe that the department is consequently lying to them. And I have very little reports. I read heaps of reports, and very little of them support what the client is actually saying. And they could say, this is the client's view, blah, 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 blah. They could be more factual in the way they're presenting their issues, but they're not. They are full of biases, and that's what parents recognise, these biases that are triggering to the clients, because a lot of these people are never ever believed about their circumstances and how their life has been. I had someone recently contact me who had been in care herself, and her parenting, she was criticised around her parenting because she was in care. The reality is that her parent, when she was growing up, was the state. They were responsible for how she has now turned out around parenting, because she didn't have any role models around parenting. And yet they failed to understand that it was them, not those individuals at the time, not those individuals working with her now, but it was the organisation for which they worked that were responsible for how she has chosen to parent, because she had never been modelled appropriate parenting, nor had they assisted her when she left care in order to better understand when she has a family what that should look like. These are failings of the department. These are issues which they need to address. When a child turns 18, they're out. And the department is happy to say, I'm not having anything to do with you again. Politicians, you need to listen that we need to change this system so that when people exit care, they are cared for many years afterwards, because of the trauma that they've experienced, not just the reasons why they're taken into care, but what care has meant to them. And I won't go into it now. I can cite many examples where people are thrown out from the system and left to sink or swim, and many of them, unfortunately, sink. Now, the next article that I want to go to is this one. And this is really about the system itself and how it treats its people. Now, I'm the first to admit that the child protection system is one in which very early in my career, when I was even in a placement, my first placement actually was in the child protection system with Families SA back in the day, or Child and Youth Services or something it might have been back then. But I chose to work in an environment which I didn't want to work in as my first placement, because my second placement was a placement in which I did want to work, which was a therapeutic placement. And what I experienced when I was working there was, for a third year social work student, was pretty horrific. And as a mature age student, I had a sense as to what was right and what was wrong. And I can remember walking into a lunchroom one day, and the staff were criticising a family and calling them feral. And my approach at that point was, you can't label people, and certainly referring to your client group as feral is inappropriate and unprofessional. I don't care whether you're in a staff room or wherever you are. And I came out and I said so. I was only a student. They remembered that. I had someone come back to me years later who remembered me coming into that room and telling the staff off for referring to people as feral. And I believe that to this day, that way of identifying people that you're working with is inappropriate. You don't have to appreciate their behaviour, and often we don't, but we don't have to label them as being the other, being less than we are, being feral. So, and that's another issue with the department. What language do they use within the department to describe the people that they're working with? I can assure you that there are many occasions it's pretty terrible. And there are very few people within the department who would pull up workers for the way they speak. I spoke to a woman earlier this year who was just leaving the department. She'd only been there a very short period of time, about a year, I think. And she was leaving because of those very reasons. She couldn't believe the way that people within the department were talking about the clients, that they labelled them, they categorised them, they were determining them in ways which was lesser than others. So they saw them as second-class citizens. Now, you can't work appropriately with people who you see as lesser than you. You know, they're going to sense your biases. They're going to judge you, the worker, because of the way that you're thinking about them. So that's my second point. The department needs to make sure that people that they're working, the staff members, are using appropriate language within their work environment to talk about when they talk about other people that they're working with. That they must recognise that there is a positive element to everybody and that we must find out what those positives are as opposed to continually doing what the department does, which focuses on the deficits. Point number 2, that's what we need to change. In this article, it says South Australian Child Protection Department staff exhausted, disillusioned and leaving in droves. And one of the reasons why they're leaving in such droves is because of these issues that I'm talking about. If you're a social worker and you're just starting in the profession and you've been taught that you've got to be use strengths perspective and use systems theory and a whole lot of other valuable stuff that tells us how we should be working with people. And then you go into a system that teaches you that will throw that shit out because that isn't the way we actually work, because we're working with this underclass and there are some terrible people out there. And certainly I know that if you're going and seeing these sort of people all the time, that's the version you can develop. But it isn't actually who people are. Their circumstances bring them to these places. And it's not necessarily that they're bad people or they're often people trying to escape from something and their world gets turned upside down as a result. And unfortunately, in many cases, it's the kids that they have that suffer. But we need to address those problems, the problems that get them there in the first place. Now, there will be many social workers who would wish to do that. But when you're encased in a system which is paying you reasonable money to do this work, and that system is working against your values, then you're going to find it really difficult to say, well, okay, I'm out of here. And I experienced that myself when I was working for an organisation 20 odd years ago, and I felt under a great deal of pressure and I was being bullied. I found it difficult to think of other things I could do apart from working there. I've just started. I know what it's like to think that this is the only place that I can work. Fortunately, I did leave and I started my own private practice, but not many people can do that. But there are lots of social work jobs out there. I'd say to anybody who's a social worker, look for other opportunities because there are plenty out there that are not within the child protection system. And there are plenty of our people out there who will use your talents and abilities, who will celebrate them rather than denigrate you for having values that are different to that of those people around you. So in this article, they say some interesting things. And again, I want to thank Lauren for this as well. The churn of exhausted and disillusioned staff through the Child Protection Department has hit its highest ever rate, prompting criticism from the union representing its workers that authorities have not done enough to keep good people. And this is in line with what I've just been saying. The good people leave, and when the good people leave, the vacuum is filled by the crap. So the really shitty social workers come in and fill that gap. For example, the young woman I met last week, I don't know how long, she's only been there out for 4 years. I don't know how long she's going to last. But what I've noticed from a lot of social workers that have been there for a long time, they become, I don't know how to describe it, tainted. They become less empathetic. It's mechanical what they do. It lacks interaction and caring and nurturing. It lacks all those things the longer you keep in a system that doesn't support those qualities. And this young social worker I met, I hope she doesn't. I hope she's able to maintain the wonderful skill set that she's got. But there are many like her who enter this system and then find that they have to leave because the values no longer fit what they were taught and who they actually are. It comes as a system was swamped by more than 100,000 reports of suspected child abuse or neglect last financial year. Morale has also been affected by high-profile deaths of children, which I've discussed on many occasions and am discussing now, who neither the department and the union says workers are burnt out. Across the department, the turnover rate of staff has hit 16.8% last financial year, which, according to a recent report to government by New South Wales expert Kate Alexander, is the highest level it has reached. And if any organisation was receiving a turnover rate of 16, 17, 20%, the managers, the chief executive officers of that organisation would want to know why, where that's coming from, what are we doing that is causing that many social workers to leave. Now, I don't know whether any reports have been made by the department itself, internal reports investigating whether they have an answer to that. But if they do, I would suggest they find a way to address that issue quick, smart. That would equate to about 393 of the estimated 2,342 full-time equivalent staff employed in 2021-22. The problem is worst in frontline roles, working with the most troubled young people living in state-run homes. Now, that creates a different issue. So we have the social workers who work with the parents and the family in general, and then we have the social workers and youth workers who work in residential care facilities. Now, the residential care facilities is a rotating system where no one's doing the parenting stuff because no one parents. They are youth workers and social workers. And the children are treated as a product that simply comes in. They have to do their work with them during the day, take them out, whatever it is they have to do, and then leave them. What therapeutic work is done? Very little, if any. So that is a different role altogether apart from the investigation and assessment role. So a lot of the social workers in that role in the residential care facilities are finding that this is just tough work. The kids are older. The kids are saying what they want. They're demanding what they want. I work with a young person now who's in residential care who says that she likes that system in a way, even though she's quite safe at home and she does spend a lot of time with her parents, but she prefers that system because she always gets what she wants. She just needs to kick up a fuss, say she's going to harm herself, whatever, and she will get whatever it is they give her. No rules, or doesn't appear to be any rules at all. And that's the system in which a lot of social workers themselves are finding themselves having to work. The department says it has employed an extra 38 staff to work in state-run homes in the past year. Not all of those are social workers. The other issue is about the qualifications of those people. Are they qualified to be able to do this work? I would suggest that some of them aren't. How have they been evaluated? What is their mental and psychological state? These sort of things also need to be looked at. But Ms. Brown said there was an acute staffing crisis with a culture of churning and burning. So we'll just go through as many people as we can and see what happens at the end of the day. We'll just throw people at the problem. We won't bother to make sure that they're appropriately supervised. And that brings me to another point. So this is about point 3 or 4, about changing the system. The system needs to find better ways to supervise its staff. Now, in order to do that, you need trained, well-informed people with professional wisdom who can supervise staff appropriately, which is not always about cases. The most important thing one should do when you're working with staff is to find out how their well-being is, how they're coping with not just the work that they're doing, but with life in general. Because, if you have a crappy relationship with your partner or your kids or something else is happening in your life, or you've lost someone that you love and you're in a state of grief, all that stuff will impact the way you work. There'll be a number of staff who have experienced many of the experiences, I guess, that the people that they work with have experienced. How are they processing that? Supervision is a therapeutic process to help people work through what's happening for them at work, which has been impacted by what's happening to them in other parts of their lives. Pardon me. But supervision isn't like that in the department. Supervision is about what's your caseload, how many are you seeing, what are you doing, what's happening with regard to this particular family, these kids, right, whatever. And then a supervisor or a manager makes the decision, not the person working on the ground. The manager and the supervisor, who probably haven't any contact with whatsoever with the families, they're the ones that are making a decision. And often that decision is different from a decision that the person on the ground would have made. Point number 4, give more authority to those people working with the families. Point number 5, put more resources in there for people that are working with the families, so that, and give them more time to do therapeutic type work with the family, to give them time to spend more time, not just at meetings or in access, but other times working through the actual issues that they're faced. Not send them off always to do a drug and alcohol course somewhere, or go and see a psychologist somewhere else, or whatever. But to find the time to work with them, to understand them. I can tell you now that from the people that I work with, I have a better understanding of who they are and what their issues are, because I spend heaps more time with them than what the social workers in the department do. But to me, that's not right. The social workers within the department should be spending as much time as what I do. Now, I understand their caseloads are massive. I get that. And I also understand they don't have the skill set sometimes to do the therapeutic type work. I'm not suggesting deep, involved therapeutic work. I mean, talking about surface stuff, understanding where they come from, why they're in the situation that they're in, and let's finding a pathway out of it. They don't do that because many of them, not all, but many of them don't have the skill set or believe they don't have the time to be able to do that. So we need more workers, point number 6 or 7. We need more workers, certainly, but we need more workers so that people have smaller caseloads, so you can spend more time. Imagine, and I'll say this to the social workers there, imagine if you only had 10 clients. What amount of time would you choose to spend with those clients? What would that time be like? You know, a lot of social workers will spend time with the kids because in the past, not necessarily now, in the past they saw the kids as their clients, not the parents or the family members. So let's work with, and particularly, you know, when they're younger kids, it's more important to work with the family to get them to build accesses, you know, to find different ways to prevent parents from not parenting their children while they're in the department's care, because that seems to be the focus. Point number 8. Don't try to separate families from their children. Don't try and do that. You know, when kids go to GOM18, it automatically becomes once a week, one hour per month, if that. And that is detrimental to the well-being of any child. Detrimental. So why do it? You do it because it's expedient, because you don't have the resources to be able to facilitate more and more accesses. I've had 2 cases recently where the parents have told me that the children haven't even been told why they're removed, and they haven't even been told that the person that they're meeting, namely their parent, is their parent, their mother or their father. Explain to me why that's the case, because that's just beyond me. I don't understand that at all. But what damage are you doing to a child? Who in the hell does this child think that they're meeting at Access? A friend? Someone they can play with? How significant is that? It's a crime. So stop it. It's just unhelpful. So there's a couple of additional points that need to be changed. So there's that one, and then there's this article here, which was also by Lauren. Child Protection Department uses lucky dip system to choose which at-risk kids to check on. Now, this is another issue. I know this seems like a long video, and I hope you're stuck with me through this, because this is really important stuff. There is no systemic way of deciding which reports about at-risk children should be investigated or closed. There's no system. That's basically what they're saying. The state government has been warned. Prompting criticism, vulnerable kids are relying on the lucky dip system. So there's no real structure in which the assessment is made. And that structure is about the degree of professionalism of the person doing the assessment and the relationship that that person builds with the parents. This is the key. But the department ignores this on every occasion. It follows a warning from former Commissioner Mal Hyde last month that there isn't any detailed systemic way of deciding which reports are investigated, referred elsewhere or closed, as the process can vary between officers. No consistency within the officers. Point number 9, get consistency within your officers. Why is there not consistency? Because officers are little silos. They do their own thing. They don't give a shit about the minister or the chief executive. They don't care about that. They just do their thing. There's no monitoring. Should there be, point number 10, an overarching body that independently looks at each office, that is able to reprimand managers when they're behaving badly. And I've seen some terrible managers who bully and harass staff in order to get ticks against, their outcomes, their PKIs or whatever. And those people need to be named and shamed and got out, because there's a lot of them, I suspect, particularly in the upper echelons, managers and supervisors, who need to be got rid of. Get rid of them. Point number 10, that is. As follows, fair warning from Commissioner Mal Hyde. If there's any detailed systematic way elsewhere close to the process, can vary between officers, between supervisors as to where the priorities lie. So between people, supervisors and managers and staff, and what voice do the staff have in telling the supervisors honestly how they feel about a client, because they might be put down by the staff member because the staff member is so freaking biased in the first place. Malhard warns he could not be assured that the most important cases are receiving attention under the current system. Opposition Child Protection spokesman Josh Teague has said the unacceptable situation is leaving vulnerable children relying on a lucky dip system. However, Department Deputy Chief Executive Fiona Ward said the number of screened-in reports had soared more than 60% since 2017. And I wonder why Fiona's there. Where's Kathy Taylor? That's another mystery. And the additional pressure on the system was something that we're not known in the time of the 2069 report. She said almost 40,000 such reports were lodged in 2019, 20 and 2021, and a similar figure is anticipated for 2021-2022 as more families deal with complex issues, including domestic. These issues have been around for years, right? This is not the first that we've heard of domestic violence, substance misuse, and mental well-being. This is not the first. So what in the hell are you talking about? I'll never know. Mr. Hyde called for a review of how reports are allocated for investigations, referrals or not proceeding, to ensure higher risk of harm matters receive priority attention and there is an accountability system. The proportion of cases sent off to other agencies has grown from about 38% in previous years, while the department has consistently investigated just fewer than 20%. So they pass them off. They're outsourcing the job that they should be doing, and that in itself is atrocious. They did not progress any improvements. Instead, things went backwards. The state government has invested $128.9 million into child protection, including additional staffing amongst a range of other measures, and is preparing to strengthen legislation and make other improvements. And I wait with bated breath just to find out what that additional staffing, training, supervision, better quality staff, all the things, the 10 things I've mentioned in this discussion, I'm anxious to see exactly what that looks like. Now, we would like you to, if you've got any issues in relation to any of this, we'd certainly like you to email us and have a conversation with us about any of the problems that you might have and see whether we can work through them. We're still going to do interviews with people. If you're prepared to do an interview, we can cover your face, hide your voice, do whatever needs to be done in order to make you anonymous, but we'll certainly be happy to do that where possible as well. And I'd just like to say that if you could just subscribe as well, if you're watching this on YouTube, ring the bell so you can get further notifications, because there's a lot more going to happen in this space, and I'm sure that we will be notifying you of whatever is happening right here. Thanks everybody for being with me. Take care, look after yourselves, be safe, and make sure that you look after your kids.